So imagine that you have your own personal bodyguard, someone whose their whole job is to protect you, keep you safe, and you're like, oh, this is awesome. They drive my car, keep me safe if anyone's going to try to rob me, or if I get into uncomfortable conversations, this person will step in and just protect me. I got this bodyguard. Now, imagine the bodyguard grew up in a war-torn country and ever since was a little child was fighting in wars and was super trigger happy and super defensive. So that anytime anyone even comes up to approach you, this guy freaks out and tackles them. You have a birthday party, and someone comes out with a birthday cake, and he sees it and thinks there's danger there, so he bashes the cake down on the floor and pulls you into the other room to protect you. Sort of like, this is great that you're here to protect me, but can you lighten up a little, right? That's the situation that we are in with our survival instinct. So this book here is Rebecca Heiss writing about how the way that we live our lives in the modern world, there are particular challenges that we face in the modern world because the human body, the human brain, a human system has been adapted to a different kind of life, different kind of dangers, different kind of issues. And so in one chapter, she talks about our survival instinct, or what we talk about it sometimes as the stress response, that we're constantly surveying our environment, and when we see something that's a potential threat, a bunch of things happen physiologically to help us be ready to run, to fight, flight, or freeze response. Ideally, it would be to fight or to run away. And this is great if you're being chased by a tiger, and is not great if these things that are happening around you trigger this fight or flight response all the time. So here's what she says. Our brains are not built for this world. They're built for an environment of scarcity and danger. Throughout our history, humans have been developing instinctive behaviors that aligned to help us survive a terribly difficult daily existence. Fear is at the root of our survival. Okay, if you're in a dangerous situation, having a good fear response is good. It helps you, right? It is at the root of our survival. Fear kept our ancestors safe from predators and competitors while driving our instincts to hunt, gather, and find eligible mates. But here is perhaps the biggest challenge that we have, the biggest biological flaw that has revealed itself in modern times. That is the failure of our stress response to adapt to and differentiate modern stresses from truly life-threatening stressors. In other words, it sees everything as a life-threatening stressor. In our ancestral environment, this cascade of responses, the stress response, this cascade of responses was a short-term and rarely elicited solution. Didn't happen that often. But modern life constantly bombards us with sensory input at speeds we simply cannot process. As a result, we often find ourselves in sensory overload, causing our brains to perceive everything as stressful in order to, quote unquote, keep us safe. So now we have an environment, and this is particularly enhanced in the 21st century with the advent of the explosion of information through the internet, and then having stuff available on our phones 24/7, and having social media that sort of builds on whatever's going on around us. So we're constantly living with this. And what that means then is that maybe in the past there would be a certain small group of people who had unusual trauma in their past, who would go through life then struggling with anxiety and fear. So maybe when I began my ministry, I don't know that I'd even preach a sermon about this. Or if I did preach a sermon about this, I would recognize that there's only a small group of people that really struggle with this stuff. Whereas today, many of us struggle with this at varying levels, with dealing with, sort of managing our overactive stress response, our overactive worry mode and stress mode. And the price we pay for this, it's just on all kinds of levels. It erodes our happiness. You've maybe heard this saying before. Someone said that a parent of adult children is only as happy as their least happy child. And what that as parents, you then worry about the well-being of your kids, right? That's just like one example. And then we have all of these things in our lives that eat away at our sense of well-being because we're worried about this, we're fearful about that, concerned about that. It damages our relationships. It is fuel for our addictions. It is what pushes people into addiction. It is almost always a key part of relapse when people are addicted. It is the something stressing them out and making life unbearable in that way. That's what causes us to turn to various things. It damages our work and our career because we're not able to manage the stress and uncertainty. It damages our physical health, obviously. And it also damages our spiritual life. It challenges our ability to live with, remember the fruits of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Instead of living that way, some of us are just on this edge of stress and just snapping at people and reacting, and it's challenging our spiritual life. So this message series is all about renewal, how to find spiritual renewal, how spiritual renewal then overflows and brings renewal to all of the different dimensions of our lives. It's to renew is to make like new. It's like a computer that you bring home and then you connect to the internet, and this is not as much happening today as it used to back in the day, but you take your computer home and you start surfing around on the internet, then you get all these viruses and the computer slows down and maybe even doesn't even work. Our website right now, does anyone know that Bethel's website is down right now? Some weird thing is going on. Periodically then we need to take those computers and do a reset and clean up all that junk and get it to work again. And that's what this series is about. And so this key, if you want to live a joyful life, if you want to have good relationships, if you want to find lasting recovery from addiction, somehow we've got to figure out how to manage anxiety and stress. This is a key for us, is to figure out how to manage anxiety and stress. We pay attention to our needs and our limits as human beings. We work to create a life that's amazing and exciting, but also sustainable. A life that we don't feel the need to escape from. See, that's what pushes people into addiction, is they feel like I need to escape into this or that. So if we can create a life where we're actually experiencing love and joy and peace, that empowers us. All right. So, with that as our background then, as you can imagine, the Bible has a lot to say about how we can deal with our anxiety, has a lot to say about trusting in God and the difference that can make in our lives. And so this verse we're looking at, Peter says, cast all your anxiety on God because he cares for you. Cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you, which you might, that verse might be familiar to you because it's also an echo of an Old Testament passage in the book of Psalms, Psalm 55. Kind of has the same thing, and it's possible that Peter, as he was writing this, had that psalm kind of circulating in his head. Cast all your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall. Whatever anxieties we have, whatever worries we have, whatever cares we have, we can cast them on God. We can turn them over to God. So let's talk about what that means. And I put a couple of things together. So first it means, cast our anxiety means, and kind of essentially it means to deliberately turn those things over to God. That what's bugging you, don't just let it simmer, but bring that to God. Turn it over to God. So, a couple things about the words. In fact, I'm going to change the order just a little bit. So, to cast. The Greek word is it's from the Greek verb eripto, which simply means to throw, to cast, like you would throw a ball, to throw something, and then you take that verb or that mindset, and with regard to not a physical object, so whatever anxiety you have, you throw that up to God, right? Cast that over to God, and then anxiety, to cast your anxiety, that comes from the Greek word merimna, which is also used as a verb. So merimna is anxiety, worry, care, whatever stressing you out, right? And then that is then used as a verb to have anxiety, to worry about something, to be unduly concerned. And so one example, this word is used in Matthew 6 when Jesus says, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Well, that's the same word. Merimna is your anxiety. Don't have anxiety. Don't stress out. Don't be anxious about tomorrow. So we turn that stuff over to God, which we're going to talk a little bit more about a little bit later. And then, but notice the verse, he says, cast all your anxiety on him. So that's a reminder that it's everything. Whatever is going on in your life, whatever's going on in your world, whatever is causing you stress, turn it all over to God, right? Cast all your anxieties over to God. And then we do this accepting the promise that he cares for us. We cast our cares on God because we know that he cares about us and he can do something about it. In a sense, I believe that this may be the heart of the issue for some of us, is to wrestle with, do I really believe that God notices what's happening in my life, that God cares about what's happening in my life, that God will help me with whatever's happening in my life? Do I really believe this, that he cares for me? Reminds me of one of my favorite Psalms. I think most Christians would probably identify this as at least one of their favorite Bible verses, is Psalm 23. And, it's wild. I come across this verse, or I bring up this verse so often, almost every time I'm doing a funeral, visitation or graveside funeral, or the funeral service itself. This is one of the verses we are reminding ourselves of, because it goes on to talk about, even in the valley of the shadow of death. But just in general, the Lord is my shepherd. Some translations say, I shall not want. I will lack nothing. I have everything that I need. The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything that I need. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes or restores my soul. And in a desert climate, a mountain desert climate, this is especially important that he leads, like a shepherd leads the sheep to waters, where the shepherd also brings the sheep to places where there's things for them to eat, where the shepherd cares for them and provides for them. That's what God does for me. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Now, some of you know this about me, my background. I grew up on a farm, and my dad, along with raising crops, raised cattle. And I don't know, I think it might have been all of his life my dad had cattle. And my dad loved our cattle. Sometimes he would just be out standing by the cattle yard, we call it the cattle yard, and just watching them, hanging out with them. And so in a sense, he really cared about the cattle, and so we would do whatever we could do to make the cattle's life better. And we would do things sometimes that they didn't even like. You know, we would sort them, and then we would put them in this stanchion, which they hated. They would jump around, but then we would give them medicine if they were sick, which was good for them, but they didn't know it. They didn't like it. But my dad is like, I want to do whatever I can to protect these animals and to help these animals thrive. Now, again, let's be honest. He was a businessman, right? He cared for them because that was a business. He did like the cattle. I know he did, and we butchered them, right? I mean, they probably had shorter lives because of the fact that we were farmers and raising them. So, as imperfect and selfish as this love that my dad had, he tried the best he could to protect these animals and to give them a good life. Well, to whatever imperfect degree that was going on for my dad with his cattle, I think about that God has that perspective about you, and God has that perspective about me. He loves us. He cares about us. He's going to do whatever he can do to protect us, to help us grow. And sometimes that's going to be like we're chasing the cattle to put them in the place where they can get the medicine, which they hated. They're freaking out. You know, sometimes we do things, sometimes God is at work in our lives and brings us to places we're confused and frustrated about, but God has his plan. And so, with that understanding, that allows us, I think, to feel more peace about giving these things over to God, because he really does care. He really does care. He's really at work to bring good out of the situations in our lives. Okay, so how do we do this? I want to suggest a very practical routine. And the first part of it it's not a specific thing you do, but it's a specific thing you need to stop doing. And I need to stop doing. And that is, we need to stop running into brick walls. What do I mean by that? Hang on. Let's suppose you have a friend, and they come to you, and their face is scratched up, and they're talking kind of funny, and you realize they have like a concussion or something, and their face is scratched up, and so you take them to the doctor, and they get some, like some painkillers, and they get stitched up where their face was cut, and you find out they ran into a brick wall. Like, wow, that's a bummer. The next day they come to you, their face is scratched up again, and they're talking funny. And you go through the same process and get them help. And then the next day, they come back again, and their face is even more damaged. And you're like, what are you doing? And they say, well, I kind of like running into walls. I know it makes me feel so alive. Um, and you're like, I want to help you, but I can't really help you if you keep on doing the thing that is hurting you, right? You're constantly just playing catch up to protect them from the thing. It would be like way better if they would not run into the brick wall, right? We have that. I've talked about this a fair bit in previous messages, so I don't want to go into it again today. But there are so many things in our world that are available to us. Once again, going back to what I was saying at the very beginning, that person talking about how we have modern life today and how it is a mismatch to how human life has gone on for so long. We have to understand this. We have access to unique technologies that are messing us up. And to the degree that we continue to go back to those things, we go back to those sites that give us these updates, we go back to these things that give us this information, and all of it is skewed information. That's the key. We're given news information that is designed to get us worked up so that we'll keep watching and that we'll tune in again. And here's the thing, almost always, that information that we're being bombarded with, almost always, it's sharing a perspective about the world without God and God's purpose, without grace, without the movement of God in the world. That is not considered at all. So essentially, what we're encountering or interacting with, that is what the Bible would call the message of the world. It's the perspective of human life and of human tragedy and of human fear and the problems and struggles, but it's all done without any reference to God's purpose, God's redemption, God's protection. And so it's like even more stress-inducing, right? So that's the message of the world. 1 John 2 says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And all of us need to reckon with this disconnect in how we're living our lives from noon on Sunday through until about 9 o'clock on the following Sunday morning. So we come and we have this experience of worship, and we hear about God's purpose in the world and how God's at work in the world, and we hear a message from the Bible. And then we drive away from church. We got the radio on to some news thing, and we start watching TV. We start going on our computers, and we're that way throughout the whole week, getting bombarded with all this stuff. And until we reckon with this disconnect, we're just like running into the wall over and over and over and over. So stop running into the wall. Is there stuff that you read, sites, news sites, shows that just when you read them, when you interact with them, they make you just worried, angry, stressed, frustrated? Maybe we need to tune that down and stop running into the wall. Okay, with that said, it says ever. Sorry, that's a misprint. It should say never, never let your anxieties stay vague. Last week, if you remember, we talked about doubt and the spiritual questions and struggles that we sometimes have. And one of the points there was I said, never let your doubt stay vague. If you have doubts, questions, get clear about them so that you can actually do something with them. So this week, we're saying the exact same thing about our anxieties. Are you stressed out? What are you stressed out about? Are you anxious? Are you worried? What exactly is stressing you out? What exactly are you worried about? So, you see the woman writing there, I am a strong advocate for this. Write it down. I heard this from Rick Warren, actually, pastor, author. I think he's retired now. At a pastor's conference, he said this. He said, and it's not unique to him, it's an old saying. The old saying goes, thoughts disentangle themselves as they pass through your lips and your fingertips. Thoughts disentangle themselves as they pass through your lips and your fingertips. This is one of the reasons why people go to therapy, or they have a group time where they talk. They have to talk, they have to say things out loud. And when we say things out loud, we get clarity about these things that are spinning around in our minds. Well, we can do this for free, or whatever the cost of a piece of paper and a pencil is, and start writing stuff down. So the thing I had you do at the very beginning of this, before we started the message, that blank sheet of paper, write down, what are you anxious about? So if you look at that again, what exactly is it? What are you worried about? And you could say, my kids. Which kid? What specifically are you worried about in the life of that kid? What are you worried might happen or might not happen? You see what I'm saying? In other words, instead of it being just this vague generality that spins around in your head all the time, let it be a specific, clear, distinct thing that you can then do something with, that you can pray about or whatever, okay? So don't let it be vague. Write it down. Get clear about it. And then, along with this, arrange a meeting every day. And I believe many of us, most of us maybe in this room, already have this habit, but I'm sure that some of us don't yet. And that is the habit, ideally in the morning, or maybe you're just not a morning person, you have a unique morning schedule, so then maybe do it at night. But you have a specific time where you meet with God. You have a time of prayer, you have a time of Bible intake, Bible reading, meditation, but you have this meeting with God every day. And then in that meeting, here's what you do. You take that list of things that you're worried about, that you're stressed about. Take that thing, and in your time of prayer, as you've had time reading the scripture, when you're in the presence of God, take that list and then discern something. Discern what's yours and what's not yours. In other words, what can you do something about, and what can you not do anything about? All right? So, what I have found in the coaching that I do with other leaders, we have a whole thing where we get together and we have a person go on the hot seat, and they bring up a problem, an issue in their church, and so then we start working with them about this problem. We start drilling down, and we drill down, and it ultimately comes down to this question: what is it about this issue that you can do something about, and what is it that there's nothing you can do about? It has to do with what other people are thinking, what they're saying. You can't specifically control it. I bring this up because here's the thing. After many years of doing this, I know it's at least 80%, maybe closer to 90% of the things that we're worrying about are things we can do nothing about anyway. We can't control it. People are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to think what they're going to think. These circumstances are going to roll in whatever way. There's nothing we can do about it anyway. We just have to let that go. So that is not ours. But there are some things that we can do. And in fact, what I'd like to push on this, if you're taking notes, it's something that I can do something about. That's one thing. But then it's something that I can do something about today. Because there's things that I might worry about, but I can't do anything about them today, so they're not mine. That's God's. I need to put that on, or turn that over to God, because I'm living right now, and that has to do with the future. So discern what is yours and what is not. So Matthew 6, Jesus says, seek first his kingdom, that is the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, that is God's righteousness, and all of these other things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. There are things that you can do, that I can do, that we are called to do, and there's other things that we have no control over, so we need to turn those over to God. Okay. So once again, discern what is yours and what is not. Then make a plan to do what is yours today. So if you have this list, and what you realize, there's two columns in this list, right? One column is, this is what I can do, and this is what I can't do anything about. This is up to God. This is up to me, or this is mine to do. Within this category of things that are mine, there are some things that I can do today, and things that I can't do anything about today, so those things go over to God's column. So probably what's going to happen is, if you do this, if you actually put these in columns, you're going to find just a small number of things that you can do today. And then there's going to be a huge number of things that you're worried about, that you're concerned about, that you can't do anything about, or that you need to do in the future. Do what you need to do today. And I'm going to tell you something. If you don't, then you should worry. That's why you worry. If you're not doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, the things that are yours to do, it is natural that your brain is going to remind you of those things. That's just normal. That's how the brain works, and that's a good thing. So we have these open loops of things that we are intending to do, we're committing to do, but we're not doing them. Our brain keeps reminding us about that. Well, that's the brain just doing its job. That's a good thing. So you're not going to get over worry about things that you're procrastinating or things that you're not doing that you should be doing. No one can help you with that. God isn't going to help you with that. You have those worries because those are things that you're called to do. And you do them, and then in the context of doing them, then you can move on to the next thing. But again, it's what you can do today. You do that, and then you have a meeting tomorrow and figure the rest out tomorrow. So James 4 says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it's sin for them. So Colossians, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for men. Finally then, remember we have this list. Here's the things I'm going to do today, things that are mine. This other list is not mine, that's God's. Then you turn that over to God. That's not mine. That's not my job. That's not my responsibility. And then what's going to happen, so you have that conversation with God, you have that meeting with God. Let's say it's at 7 a.m., and then you drive to work or whatever. And then at work, some of those things on that list are going to come up in your mind, right? That's how our mind works. It's going to bring, well, then you remind yourself, wait a minute, that's not mine. That's in God's hands. I've cast that. That's God's responsibility. So then it becomes a spiritual discipline over the the remaining day, whenever those things come up, you just remind yourself, that's not mine. That's in God's hands. That's God's to do today. Because then tomorrow, you can sit down and clarify the list again. Does that make sense? How many of you have done something like this already? You've done this? Okay. Those of you who got your hand up, has it helped? I see some heads nodding. I guarantee you it will help. If you struggle with anxiety, do this for a week. Come back and talk to me next week. And if it doesn't help, I'll buy you coffee, okay? We'll get you some, because it will work. It will work. Do not be anxious about anything. Paul says, but in every situation, in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, he adds in this thing, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Isaiah 41, love this promise. Do not fear, for I am with you. You've got this list of things that you've got to do. Maybe some of those are things you don't want to do. God says, don't be afraid. I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand.